Good afternoon. I'm an architect, and I'm interested in architecture, in cities, and in space. You will probably ask, in these times of very fast communication, of so many electronic devices, of the web, what is it about real physical space that we should be looking at, that we should be interested in? And you will bear with me a second, and I'm going to go back to explaining a few thoughts and a few reflections that I have been thinking of. Over 100 years ago, to be more precise, 110 years ago, the modern American architect Frank Lloyd Wright gave a very important lecture called The Arts and Crafts of the Machine. Frank Lloyd Wright proposed against what was at the moment, or at the time was thought, that the machine had been this evil engine of enslavement. What Frank Lloyd Wright proposed was the machine would really become the icon and the ideal and the model of the future of architecture and the future of our cities. It was a very, very important moment in the history of architecture and in the history of development of our communities. Frank Lloyd Wright refers in his speech, he refers to a very important chapter in Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, where Victor Hugo refers to this great moment in time when the book appears, basically when the press appears. And he calls it the biggest revolution ever. Basically, what Victor Hugo proposes, and he explains carefully, is that at that moment, architecture stopped being the only means of expressing history and of telling stories. As you may very well be aware, for many, many centuries, all the stories and all the history was basically transmitted through architecture. It started many, many years ago, and his chapter was called This Will Kill That, meaning, and what he meant is that the book would kill architecture. And others had interpreted as the new written word, the printed word, would also kill the church. But let's take the first interpretation. And let's go to understand, would it really kill architecture? And this huge we go back to the very, very beginning of architecture. And architecture started when man decided that by marking the ground or by setting a stone over a stone would mark certain events in space and would create and would define space. Obviously, every stone became a word, and every word became a sentence, and a group of stones became a text. And eventually, this created an enormous amount of textures, and all of these buildings that were being built to tell a story. Many times, very, very complicated stories. The story of humanity, the story of mankind, was basically written through our buildings. With the appearance of the printed book, with the appearance of text, architecture got completely liberated. But also ideas got liberated, and also knowledge got liberated. And then never again would knowledge be dictated by one way of looking at it, or by one dogmatic condition. And suddenly it would be part of everything. It would be part of the air, it would move, it would be everywhere, it could simultaneously be all over the place, and it would not be attached, never again, to a place and to a special site or condition. And that eventually created this amazing machine, coming back to the machine, that we now call cities. And what's happened recently? I'm going to take a very big leap. We have seen something incredible, after going through all of this in the last few years. Now we live in this world that is completely interconnected. We have been told an enormous amount of times that space is really another condition of space. We call it cyberspace, we call it virtual space. We're no more reading, we're no more writing, we're using other kinds of devices, and we're communicated in very different ways of manners. But we have seen something very, very incredible in the last years, and probably in the last year itself, that people have started creating this new revolution that has again come back to being the revolution of our societies. And take as an example what's happened in the Arab Spring. Evidently, the whole revolution started through electronic devices. People started communicating, people started transmitting ideas in places that ideas were not welcomed or were not easily to be transmitted. People started convocating each other, but at the end, they needed to come back and occupy space. Real physical space became the real case of the new revolution. And although we do, now the combination of all of that, virtual space and physical space, is what's becoming and what's creating the new condition of our future. In space, in occupying space, it has been traditionally about expressing disagreement, but it's also very importantly about creating agreement. It's the space of political debate, of economic development, of social interaction. And that's where we are now, at a moment where we need to understand what is our space, what are our cities, where are our cities going, and what do we expect for the cities of the future, or for the modern space of the future. Many, many times again, we have heard all of these theories that we would lose, that we would not need to go to public space, that we could be working out of the isolation of our rooms, of our dorms, of our offices. But at the same time, what the visionaries of our cities and the visionaries of our communities have been arguing is about the creation of this amazing, complex new machine. It's the machine of communication. The only way how people and how societies and how groups will keep on communicating is through the creation of this very complex machine called our cities. Our cities are more and more complex, and it's not only about this fluidity or flux of people, of products, of ideas, but it's really about the opportunity of the activation of the cities. And this is basically the one idea that I've been wanting to share with you, which is, what are our cities? Is the traditional city, is the traditional space of the city, is the public space that we know as a pre-modern space, the right space for the next communities, for our communities, for your generation? Or is there a need, or is there an opportunity, which I think there's a huge one, to create the space of the future? It's not the traditional space, and what is this absolute opportunity to create what we are calling the open city and the open public space? For many years also, we have been hearing about the open as the open sort of hardware condition in our machines. But on the other hand, architects and planners are creating these new conditions of the city, these new opportunities of the cities. But what they are willing to acquire and to achieve is to have everybody, all of us, come and activate the city. Public space and architecture does not exist without the participation of all of us. Debate does not exist. Democracy does not exist if we don't all go together, occupy the cities, and give meaning to the cities. And there's all these new opportunities and new possibilities of creating the city of the future, which will probably be more dense, more active, will be lighter, will be much more porous, will be permeable, and will allow us to be part of that new democracy. Thank you very much.